Let's face it, it's one of the worst parts of our legal system that sometimes, despite best efforts in some cases, innocent people convicted of horrific crimes sent to prison, often for years, even decades at a time. Recent advances, including DNA testing, have made it easier to hopefully correct those cases where innocent people sent to jail for a crime they never committed. And that is something to be celebrated. Sure that the wheels of justice, no matter how slowly, do in fact turn. But what, if anything, does the state owe these people who lose so much here, not just time behind bars and lost opportunities, but in many cases, families that basically vanish in those preceding years? Now, an old case is getting new attention, and that's thanks to, in small part, a new documentary, and it's asking that very tough question. Andrew?
Well, Rich, it was a crime that shocked and gripped New York City back in 1989, the Central Park jogger case. A woman jogging through the park, attacked and raped and all but left for dead. Miraculously, she survived. But the crime hit a slew of hot buttons for city residents: crime and policing, race relations, gang activity. It was a crime that demanded justice, the quicker the better. 5 young men, all under the age of 16, were arrested. They were questioned by police for more than 24 hours straight, and eventually 4 of the 5 confessed to the crime. All were convicted almost entirely on the strength of those confessions. The 5 were sent to prison, where they stayed for more than a decade. Then in 2002, a man serving a life sentence for rape and murder admitted he had committed the 1989 attack. The Central Park 5, as they would come to be known, were released, and soon after they filed suit against the city seeking $50 million for each of the 5 men. That suit was filed in 2003, and Rich, the case has yet to be settled. It is still pending. And there's a possibility it'll go to court, there's a possibility of a settlement, but 10 years later, no movement by the city. And we've got a lot of questions surrounding this. I think everybody agrees when they look at the facts of the case that these kids got railroaded and the justice system was not there for them. And I know, Dominic, you covered this as well when it happened. I remember the term wilding even came out of that, remember, and everything else. But then there's outstanding questions to say, not only was justice not served, but then how do you make up for these victims? And there are laws governing how to compensate people, and they vary, right, state to state? They do. Only 27 states actually have statutes on the book that cover this sort of compensation. In New York, it's basically up to a judge. The judge determines how much is a fair amount to reasonably compensate people. I found examples of former prisoners getting between, anywhere from $11,000 for every year that they were in prison to $300,000 for every year they were in prison. In New Jersey, the statute says it's twice the amount of their income the year prior to their incarceration, or 20 grand, whichever is greater. So it's substantially less and a much lower cap in New Jersey. And on the federal level, death penalty cases capped at $100,000 per year they spent in prison. Other cases, it's just $50,000 per year. So it varies from state to state. There are plenty of states where there are no rules that govern this. In New York, at least, it's not just money and what you were earning. I just want everybody to process what Andrew said. You imagine for a second, you now, okay? You get sent away for a crime that you said to everybody, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And they take away decades of your life. And they tell you, in effect, we'll give you 10, 20 grand a year for basically time served in a hellhole. And you lose your family in all likelihood and reputation and everything else as a consequence. Well, it's not just a theory. I now have a guest here who can speak to this firsthand, Jeffrey Deskovic. He is head of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. It's a group focused on ending and/or correcting wrongful convictions and providing assistance to those wrongfully convicted after release. And the subject is a very personal one for Mr. Deskovic, who himself served 16 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. And like the Central Park 5, his conviction also hinged on a false or coerced confession. Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us. We've talked before about your particular case, but the conversation I'd love to have is, first of all, put a human face on it. You get sent away for something you never did. You know it. And even if the world doesn't want to believe you, and the old saw is everybody's innocent when they say they go in there, I didn't do it, but you actually know you didn't do it. You lose a lot more than just time behind bars, don't you? Absolutely. First of all, you miss the normal stages of development, particularly in the case of youths. Myself, I was 17 when I went in. Central Park 5, where actually it's a little bit younger than I am. But beyond that, you miss births, deaths, other milestones. You miss a chance to get your education, form a family, start a career. It's much more than just a loss of your freedom.
And plus, there's the emotional, psychological impact of being wrongfully imprisoned.
And maybe people have supportive family systems outside, but in a lot of cases, I mean, you can speak to this, but I've read and I've interviewed other people, the families turn their backs on because they say, you know, I didn't raise a murderer here, or whatever the case may be, or a rapist, whatever the person was convicted, turns out wrongfully for, and they lose everything. They lose their spouses sometimes, they lose the connections with the kids, they lose their parents. The parents, as you said, might have passed away, and they'll even never know afterwards that their kid was always innocent and it was true. That must be impossible to reconcile.
No, it is. I think that that phenomenon that you're talking about is enhanced by the fact that most prison systems, including New York State, they house prisoners who are from the city in facilities that are much further, like 3, 4, 5 or more hours away, and vice versa. So that, I think, adds to that. There are a few family members that hang on, but normally you lose contact with most of your extended family and often members of your immediate family, as you've pointed out.
So I'll get to the math of how to do the compensation and how it works. But to me, I think you can put this in two different categories. One is where you have impropriety on the part of the prosecutor here. Either they hide evidence or there's confessions that are coerced, like we talked about for the Central Park Five. But the system didn't work here and it got perverted in many cases. And I think that one we can get our arms around and say, you know what, it's wrong on so many levels. Not only did the guy get screwed out of so much of his life, but the system worked against him and didn't give him a fair shot. But then there's the tougher one, which is, what if everybody played it on the up and up? The prosecution, there was no DNA evidence at the time, they had eyewitness accounts, they had every reason to believe they got the right guy, but in fact, it was the wrong guy. But it wasn't out of malice, they didn't try to, as I said, pervert the system. Should there be a difference in the compensation for the person, or is it 16 years that were lost, whether or not they had the best of intentions or not, you'll never get the years back?
Well, you'll never get the years back. That being said, I think that there should, to the extent that awards aren't just about financially compensating, but there's also supposed to be a deterrent effect, there's supposed to be a punitive. So to that extent, I think that if there's maliciousness, that should enhance. Okay.
Dominic, over the years, there's been this, Jeffries wasn't the only case, the Central Park Five weren't the only case. I remember there's a cab driver that I interviewed when he came out, and they come out to a new world that they don't even recognize. Things moving fast. I mean, think of technology, how much it changes. But the number, and I chose to ask the question a little differently today online. It wasn't like, what kind of compensation? What should taxpayers pay? And that's how it gets framed, because cities have to say, hey, we're hurting for money here. We can't give $50 million to each kid like the lawsuit claims here. How should the math work, you think, in terms of trying to make a bad situation right?
Excellent question. I wish I could answer it, but I know the current system that we have is ridiculous. A lot of it is also based on income potential, I believe, in the state of New York. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you happen to be a lawyer when you were falsely accused and you get the compensation, you're going to receive a lot more because you have a college degree, a law degree.
And they have a baseline to manage potential earnings.
Right, as opposed to, let's say, a chef who just happened. It's just not fair and it's not right. And, you know, with all due respect, what if, as you were speaking, how many years were you in jail?
16 years.
16 years. You lose your family. What if you were raped in prison, gang raped in prison, for something that you said all along that you didn't do? I mean, it's just outrageous. And I covered the Central Park case every day. And I sat down with Morgenthau. I give District Attorney Morgenthau a lot of credit because he did the interview with me when he admitted that, and it took a lot for a district attorney. It's rare that a district attorney will ever admit that they are wrong. And guess what, Richard? It happens almost every day in this country. A district attorney somewhere is wrong on the facts, and it's normally swept right under the rug.
And Dominic mentioned earnings potential, which is how a factor in all of this. In Jeffrey's case, you were, 17 when you...
Yes, I was.
So you didn't have a chance to go to college and expand on what would have been a higher earning potential.
Right.
Because he never had that opportunity. And it's almost like he's being penalized or was penalized for being arrested at as young an age as you were. You know, that it had to happen at all is horrible. If it had happened after you had a college degree.
So what's the dirty little secret too, Jeffrey? That it's not like you get out, they say we screwed up or whatever, sorry. you don't even just get the check right away, right? You got to go through the legal system, got to go through the appeal process. It takes forever, right?
Yeah, it takes between 3 to 7 years. I mean, I've been home for 6 years, and I still am in litigation with several entities that were involved in my wrongful conviction. To touch on your point, I agree clearly that the career level of education, lost income is a factor. It has to be for the reason that you said. That being said, that's not the entire calculus. It's also looked at what a person does when they come home.
Yep.
So you try to like project backwards, like what would have happened had their life not been disrupted. Pain and suffering, as you've alluded to, also have to be taken into account.
But if you could put your story on it, when you got out of prison, it's not like they handed you a big check and said, sorry,
No.
Jeffrey, we're going to let this go to case, but at least we'll get you situated. I remember, like, you had to deal with Mercy College, and Mercy College kindly opened doors to you. You had to literally, you walk out and you got nothing. They've taken your life away in many cases. Half of your life was behind bars for something you didn't do. And then you got to scrimp and scrape when you get out of there while you're waiting for the justice to finally do the right thing.
That's one of the cracks in the system now. When a person's released, I mean, there's no safety net, there's no governmental entity, and very little in the NGO world also, to cover the time when a person's released until the time that their case goes to trial or receives a settlement. I mean, there should be something in place. I remember, as you just mentioned, I very nearly had to go to a homeless shelter. Mercy College was nice enough to let me live in their dorms. If I had to make a trip to the city to see my lawyers, I mean, I couldn't afford to eat anything out. I used to pack cereal in a bowl and put it on my bag and eat it without milk because I couldn't afford to buy anything.
I'm just curious, how much, when you left jail, how much money did they give you to start your life over?
Nothing.
Not a dime?
No. I was home for about 4.5 years when I finally was able to settle my compensation case in state court. Prior to that, I got nothing.
Because there was actually, I remember this, because there was actual litigation, he was actually treated worse than if you had committed the crime and were released. So you want to talk about the most perverted situation here. There's an acknowledgement the man was innocent, wrongfully convicted, in his particular case or anyone else's. Obviously, you're going to seek compensation for being wrongfully convicted. Once you have an active case or even bringing a claim, they don't do anything for you. They don't even offer services. They offer a con that gets out who did the crime. We have such a messed up system in this.
And Richard, there should be limits on how, it's disgusting in the Central Park case that 10 years later, the legal department can stall this case all these years and it still has not been resolved. And the district attorney came forward, the man that Law and Order is based on, the television show, and said, listen, there was a lot of pressure to solve this case, we were wrong.
They're incentivized. There's an incentive in this case to drag this out longer because it's not complicated. The thinking is, this guy's going to need money at some point here. He's going to settle for less. And the longer we can drag it out, as they do in many claims cases of all kinds, even civil cases, you're going to drag it out because they don't have the wherewithal to afford the legal team that certainly any prosecution would have, and it decreases the damages they have exposure for. It's not complicated, but it's wrong.
As I see it, I agree with your point completely, and as I see it, it's an injury on top of an injury to do that. Now, getting back to another point you mentioned, you raised the issue of the taxpayer. You know, the government is wasting a lot of taxpayer money in fighting a lawsuit that's inevitably they're either going to have to settle or they're going to face a catastrophic loss at the end of a civil rights trial.
Yep.
Why spend all that money for attorneys when some of that could go in settling the case?
I think because you know the answer, Jeffrey. The mayor would like the next mayor to have to deal with it. He doesn't want to write the check on his or her particular watch. But
it would be a stand-up thing, though, to do the right thing.
We'll talk about a stand-up thing. I know we got to go to break, guys. But Jeffrey, not only dealing with his case, but you've worked and have gotten exonerated another inmate who actually was wrongfully convicted as well. It's a shame here there's a growing population that fits this spec here, but you not only are working on your own case, but you've helped others as well here. So I wish you the best, and hopefully the wheels of justice finally turn the right way for you and for so many here. Jeffrey Deskovic, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, we are asking you to keep this conversation going online. Head to Facebook and Twitter and sound off. How much do you think, and again, I phrased it this way because I want you to be as straight up as possible, how much should taxpayers, you and me, compensate the wrongfully convicted? When we come back here, we turn to the issue of guns in America, and what if any new gun laws Could we see in a post-Newtown America, I told you how screwed up Washington was, well, believe it or not, as bad as sequester is, I can argue this situation's even worse. Stay with us. We'll be right back.